another episode of the Steelers Villains podcast, the cultivators of the comic culture. I'm your host, AJ the Comic Collector. Tonight I'm here with Luke, E-Man, Red, and a special guest, Barry Dutter.
Hey,
how are you guys doing tonight?
Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it's our honor, sir. Thank you for being on.
Great to be
So, we're going to just, start off with some icebreaker questions, Barry, and then we'll get into your career in Marvel Comics. Is that cool?
Sure. Absolutely.
All right. We're going to
I
go.
hope you're not going to ask me any tough questions.
Oh, they're all tough. Be prepared.
Yeah.
Be prepared,
Good.
because at the end of the show, we have like a special set of questions for you, my friend.
All right.
Nothing like that square root of the 144, or how to solve a puzzle without vowels. I don't know, something like that.
Bring it on. Come on, bring it on. Let's go.
All right, sir. Let's just start off with, we're going to go with a little bit of a Halloween theme.
Mm-hmm.
Your top 3 scary comic villains.
Boogie.
All right. My first scary villain, I will say, let's start with Carrion from Amazing Spider-Man,
Okay.
who is I guess like a walking corpse, and if he touches you, you die, basically. So that's pretty scary.
Yup.
Next, I would say maybe Deathstalker, who, again, his touch is very icy and cold and can kill you if he touches you. I can't imagine what's scarier than that. And then for the third one, I'm going to go with the Green Goblin.
Oh, there's a second one right there.
There it is.
That's a good one.
We did bring up earlier conversation that Hobgoblin should be up
Hobgoblin.
there.
Nah. He's a cheap imitation of the Green Goblin.
Well, he did have the
Original was
pumpkins.
still the best.
He had pumpkins. It's the season, right?
It's just a Green Goblin with a different color mask. It's not
Nothing's better than the OG, right? I guess that's
exactly.
there. You
Yeah,
go.
Hobgoblin is the pumpkin spice of all villains.
True that.
Touche. Well played.
Sorry, Luke.
No apologies needed.
You probably grew up at a time when the Hobgoblin was huge in Spider-Man comics.
Yeah,
Yes.
he was a 90s character that was used a lot, so especially in the McFarlane Spider-Man run. I remember that.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Hobgoblin was our villain.
Yes.
The Green Goblin we viewed more as like, kind of like a campy scary and not like actually scary.
I get it. He's goofy. A lot of the 60s things that we all took really seriously seems a little goofy today.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say the other 2 characters, I'm not going to lie, I have no clue who they are.
Okay.
Carrion and I've never
Deathstalker.
read any storylines with those characters involved.
Carrion was the living clone of Professor Miles Warren,
Okay.
who, of course, cloned Gwen Stacy and the original Clone Saga.
Okay, I never read that, so.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, I know.
I'm showing my age.
Well, no, that was right around my time. I kind of stopped collecting, and then when I wanted to get back in, everyone just said it's so convoluted.
Right. Well, I'm going back to the original Clone Saga, Amazing Spider-Man 147 through 150.
Okay, gotcha.
So we talked about this, AJ. OG. Okay, OG. We're going back original gangsters over here. That's what we're talking here, right?
Yeah. I mean, I came up in the 70s. That was my era. So I just love all 1970s comics. Even the ones that sucked, I think were great. And you could say, oh, what about this comic today? And I'm like, no. These ones from the 70s were better. But the reality is they really weren't better. It's just that I was a little kid and they seemed like they were awesome.
Right.
Exactly. Ooh, fun fact, Barry, do you remember Deathstalker? Who was he originally?
It's funny that you said that. I just thought of it just now. Star Saxon, of course, was the original pistol, right?
Yeah, well, because Daredevil, right? It was the Daredevil run,
Yeah.
and I think it was his name Exterminator. I think it might have been Exterminator, and then switched to Deathstalker in Daredevil, a later one, maybe in the 100s, the teens, the one teens or something like
if
that.
anybody's on Wikipedia right now, they can look
I
it
know.
up. But, there was a villain that Daredevil fought in the Barry Smith issues, like in the 50s, like not 1950s, but Daredevil 52, 53, 54, somewhere around there. This villain, at the end, he had this machine that was going to send Daredevil to another dimension, and he did for a little while, but then Daredevil successfully came back. And at the end, the villain Star Saxon got accidentally, his own machine sent him away to another dimension. I thought he was the one who came back as Deathstalker years later. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
They could have done that too. I mean, they had so many characters. I thought that it was Exterminator to Deathstalker, but it could be that too.
We got to throw it out to the listeners. I'm
I
hoping
know,
one of the
listeners, help
listeners,
us out on that one.
if you can help us out on
Give us
that
some
one,
answers on this.
look it
Yeah,
up.
throw it at the hotline bling.
Throw it out on the hotline bling. We'll throw that number out later on.
975-7597.
There
I
you
love
go.
it.
We have a phone number, Barry. That's crazy. Who does that nowadays?
Yeah. You don't
We got a
about
hotline.
that call-in podcast.
We only accept payphone phone calls. No.
No.
don't dial 0 and then collect callers, please.
I saw a payphone the other day, and someone was using it. I was really surprised to see that. It was very rare to see.
Oh, geez, I haven't seen a payphone in years.
You
None
should
of
know.
us
I
have-
mean, you live in Orange County. There should be a few here and there.
Well, here's the thing. No one really should be going out anyway. So if you haven't seen a payphone in the last couple of months, it's because you're doing something right because of the pandemic. How about that? Yeah. Yeah.
This is how crazy. And Barry, you can relate to this. I grew up in the 80s. I used to ride my bike with my friends to the comic shop, to gas stations, to Woolworths for ice cream, and there was a payphone, and we'd call like this weird hotline that would have a lady that would, in a sexy voice, tell the time.
Yes, I remember that. I
Popcorn.
Remember that? And that was like the
Popcorn.
cool thing to do.
The time is.
It's popcorn. You guys know what that is?
Is that the movie one?
No. If you dial popcorn on your phone with your area code, it'll give you the time. That's how it was in the 80s. And it was a lady with a very
sexy voice, yeah.
sexy
Sultry
voice.
But I was like 10 years old riding my bike, to a gas station calling this payphone. What crazy times, man.
Oh, man.
Well, I do remember riding my bike to the weekly stationery store, the corner store, every week to go pick up the new comics every week. It was, one of the great joys of growing up in the 70s or 80s.
That is a great joy, actually. That is something that I don't know if will ever be recreated in today's day and age. I don't know.
No. In this day and age, it's the kids going to Target collecting Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards. It's kind of similar.
Well, that's true.
Fair enough.
Yeah. All right, sir. I know that you're a big comic collector, comic reader, but what our listeners don't know is, or maybe some of them do know, is that you also worked in Marvel Comics as a writer and as an editor, correct?
You are correct, sir.
Could you give us a little brief history of how you actually got into the industry and moved your way from writer and editor and all the little, I guess, inspirational stories you can give someone who wants to break into that business?
Sure.
Also, how'd you get the name Big Barry Dutter? It says here on the issue 26 of What the.
I actually gave myself that nickname. I stole it from Big John Buscema, and I hoped he wouldn't be too mad about it, and he never said anything, so I think he was fine.
Nice.
In retrospect, I probably should have tried to come up with something a little more original, but spur of the moment, I just like how it sounded. I just like
BBD, Big Barry Dutter.
Yeah, there you go.
BBD.
So, okay. Back in the day, there are different ways to break into comics. One of the ways that used to exist that doesn't seem to exist anymore was you become what they call a letter hack, and then you break into comics that way, which is basically you write fan letters to whichever company you like, Marvel, DC, whoever, write them letters every week about the comics that you bought and read that week. And eventually, if they start printing a lot of your letters, you get to become known as, oh, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. He seems like he's pretty knowledgeable about comics. And there have been, at least back in the day, there were several people who broke in that way. Mark Grunwald, Ralph Macchio, Joe Duffy. a number of people, and in fact, it's kind of funny if you go back and read an old comic from the 60s, and you'll see a fan letter from a Chris Claremont or a Don McGregor or someone like that. But it definitely seemed like it was an in back then. It was a foot in the door that I don't think that really exists today. I don't know of anybody breaking in that way today. But I used to sit down, go to the store every week, buy, say 5 or 10 comics every week, usually Marvel, because that was my favorite. And then I would, whichever ones I had opinions on, and when you're young, you just have a lot of opinions about everything. And I would just write fan letters. I would sit down and put a stamp on the letter, put the letter in the envelope, put the envelope in the mail and mail it in. And then I started getting so many letters printed that every week I would go to the store, and the first thing I would do is turn to the letters page and see if I had any letters printed in that week's issues. And apparently at one point, Marvel had me on the list of people who were having too many letters printed. So I was on not use his letters list briefly. Yeah,
That's kind of epic, though.
It is.
You got on the ban list for letters.
You got blocked.
Right.
That's like early days of being on the no-fly list, man. That's awesome.
So basically, everybody in industry, at Marvel at least, got to know that I was interested. That I certainly had interest in working. My number one interest was always to be a writer, to stay at home and be a freelance writer for comics. That was my goal. But I noticed it didn't, I read a lot of interviews. I used to read all the fan magazines, Comics Journal, Amazing Heroes Comics, Interview, all of them. And the number one thing I saw over and over again was you have to get a staff job at Marvel first or DC before you can really get a freelance career. That's not always true, but it just seems like that's how it usually goes.
Right.
So I said, all right. I mean, this is going to sound kind of funny, but I really didn't ever want to be on staff at any comic book company ever. I just wanted to stay home and be freelance. But I was like, all right, if I have to be on staff, I guess I'll do it. So what happened was I started writing for the fan magazines. Comics Buyer's Guide was the first one that bought one of my articles. I started interviewing everybody in the industry. I would write a letter to everybody, every writer, every editor, every artist. Hey, can I interview you for Comic Buyer's Guide? And then some of them would start contacting me. Hey, how'd you like to do a story for Amazing Heroes? How'd you like to do a story for Comic Scene, which was a big magazine at the time? So then I got to know, and then finally I took all my best articles that I'd written and I sent them into Marvel. They had a fanzine at the time called Marvel Age, and they needed writers for that. And so next thing I know, I got a call from an editor at Marvel Age magazine saying, hey, how'd you like to write for us? I was like, oh my God, I'm writing for Marvel Comics. My dream is coming true. I'm staying home and writing for Marvel. And then I was like, oh man, wouldn't it be the ultimate if I could get a tour of the Marvel Comics offices? Yeah, of course. How exciting is that for anyone? I lived in New Jersey at the time, which is, Marvel offices, of course, are in New York. So, it's a short train ride. It's like a 45-minute train ride from where I lived to, New York City. And so I contacted my editor at Marvel Age, and I was like, so how about I come on in for a tour one day? And they were like, sure, come on in. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get a tour of Marvel Comics. This is a great idea. So I did it. I got a tour. I got to meet. The person I worked with was Dwight Zimmerman, who was the associate editor of Marvel Age magazine. The editor was Jim Salicrup, another great guy. And I met Jim. I think we might have done lunch that first time when I came up to the offices. And I guess I made some kind of impression on Jim because a very short time later, Dwight was promoted to a different department at Marvel, which left an opening. He suddenly had a hole to fill in Marvel Age magazine. And Jim just kind of thought to himself and said, well, that young fellow who came up a few weeks ago for lunch, he seems like he could do the job. So he called me out of the blue and said, hey, how'd you like to come work for Marvel and be the assistant editor of Marvel Age magazine? And I was like, sure, why not? It didn't pay a lot at the time. It was actually sort of a low-paying position, but the good news was you could I'm getting an unstable connection. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Every now and then my connection gets unstable. So next thing you know, I was working for Marvel Comics. I was on staff. But yeah, I was going to say, I could give myself some freelance writing assignments while working for Marvel Age. I could say, oh, we're doing an article on the new Captain America movie. This was the 1990 movie, the one that never got released, I think.
Oh, God.
So I said, I can write that. So that was a way to supplement my income, and they were fine with that. They were like, yeah, you could, don't go crazy with it, but give yourself a couple articles a month. It'll help pay for your train fare. And, other expenses. And that's how I got my foot in the door. Next thing you know, I was on staff at Marvel.
Assistant editor sounds like a high position job, though. But
at the time, the pay was super low, and it was so low I actually had to keep my part-time job. I was working as a bartender at the time. I had a couple days a week at Marvel. I had to leave work early to go work my job just to make ends meet. It was it was something that Jim Salicrup used to do in his spare time because he was the Spider-Man editor. He was in charge of all the Spider-Man books, and because he loved Marvel and he loved just promoting the company, he would do Marvel Age in his spare time. Now, I was working in the Spider-Man office with Jim and another fellow by the name of Glenn Herdling, who also did some writing for Marvel. And every now and then the phone would ring and nobody would be around to answer, so I'd pick it up. It would be Todd McFarlane on the phone. And he would want to talk about that, month's issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And if nobody else was in the office, he would just talk to me for a couple of hours. He didn't know who I was, and I'm sure he didn't really care. He was just like, hey, this is Toddy. Toddy wants to come and talk about Spider-Man, eh? Let's talk about Spidey. And that was awesome. Imagine that. Like, one week I'm sitting at home wondering what I'm going to do, for a career, and the next week Todd McFarlane's on the phone going, hey, I got some good ideas for Spider-Man, eh? That was pretty awesome. He's Canadian, of course. So yeah, I was in the working in the Spider office on Marvel Age, and then an opportunity came up to work, basically a promotion, a higher paid assistant editor position. Went to work with a guy named Mike Rockwitz, who was an editor at Marvel at the time, and also a colorist. And the books that we were given were Conan, Savage Sword of Conan, Conan Saga, and then over time we got Captain America, Quasar, Fantastic Four. Over time I got to work on all the major Marvel characters, which was pretty awesome.
were there any characters that you had, I guess, the most fun working with?
Ooh, that's a good question. Probably the most fun I had was writing Spider-Ham. At the time, believe it or not, nobody was doing anything with Spider-Ham. And I used to think to myself, well, we got this humor comic called What The, and they liked my work and they were giving me work for What The, and I got to thinking, why don't I just make myself the guy who's the Spider-Ham guy? I said, I want to write so many Spider-Ham stories that years from now, if they ever bring back the character, I want to be the first guy people think of going, well, maybe we should call this guy first. Now, that never happened, but I did get to write a bunch of Spider-Ham stories for What The, which was a lot of fun.
I mean, go ahead, Red.
You also created a couple of new characters for that What The title, correct?
Yeah.
Which would be Miguel O'Hara.
Excuse me?
That would be Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Ham.
Yes.
1588.
Yes. Now, that issue you're holding in your hand it's a quote-unquote, it's a key issue because it's the first appearance of Spider-Ham 2099, which is really funny because it's obviously, I didn't create anything. I just took a character that already existed and changed it. I basically, I guess that's how they create characters these days. You just combine two things that already exist.
Right.
Which Marvel and DC have perfected the art of doing that in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, the thing
is, a lot of money.
Yeah, the thing that I was thinking with the Spider-Ham thing is, with the animated cartoon, they could possibly do a Spider-Ham animated and maybe use some of your stories. I mean, that'd be awesome, right?
Could be. Now with Spider-Ham, I give myself credit for this. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I was the first writer to treat Spider-Ham like a Looney Tunes character. I was the first one to have him pulling anvils out and dropping anvils on people's faces and that kind of thing, as if he were a Looney Tunes character. So when I saw the movie, the Spider-Verse movie, I was like, they didn't give me any credit for it, but that was sort of my contribution to the character.
Right.
He did feel very Looney Tune-ish in the Spider-Verse movie, and I really appreciated that, to be honest with you. He brought that comedic element to it.
He did. I think wasn't it John Mulaney as the voice of Spider-Ham?
Yeah.
And he's funny. He's a funny
and
guy.
He's funny as hell. Oh, that's right.
But it is funny that, the character that I wrote as in one issue of What The, like 20, 30 years later, that book is now like a $15, $20 book that's highly sought after by collectors because it's a first appearance of a character that's never appeared anywhere other than that one time. But because a movie had something similar to that character, now it's like a hot issue.
Do you have like plenty of copies stacked at home waiting
Oh,
for it?
I mean, back then they would give you a handful of copies of anything you wrote. They would give you like 5 or 10 copies, and I would give them to one to my dad, one to my mom, one to my best friend, one to my other friend. I just give them away like they were candy.
Yeah.
You would keep 1 or 2 for yourself, but you would never think this is going to be a key issue 30 years from now.
Right. Did you happen to go? Were you invited to go to the premiere of the animated movie?
I was not invited to go to the premiere because, well, they didn't give me credit in the movie. I don't think that. I mean, I didn't create Spider-Ham. That's not my character. So I think probably the people that created that character may have been invited. I don't know.
Yeah.
But my greatest honor that I had was I wrote a Nick Fury one-shot for Marvel. It was called Fury, and the character that I put in there ended up on Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series, and they did give me credit for it.
Oh, right on.
Oh, wow.
Which was
That's
a huge
awesome.
honor. I mean, what I did was, okay, you all know the origin of Green Lantern. When Hal Jordan, originally he was the guy, and then at one point they were like, oh no, there was a guy before him, Guy Gardner. He was supposed to be the guy before Hal Jordan. And I was
That's
like,
the guy with the bowl cut, right?
Yes.
Okay.
what's that? Yeah, there was like a fork in the road, right? Yes. So I said, let's do that with S.H.I.E.L.D. Because if you go back and read the very first S.H.I.E.L.D. story ever published, S.H.I.E.L.D. already exists before Nick Fury is brought in. Like, they come to him and they go, hey, we've got this amazing thing called S.H.I.E.L.D. We want to bring you in and make you the leader. And I got to thinking, well, what if there was a different guy who was in charge before Nick Fury? So I totally stole a page from Green Lantern, and I basically, when it comes time to create S.H.I.E.L.D., they hold up 2 photographs. They've got Nick Fury and they've got some other guy who I called Stoner. They're like, let's go with Stoner. He's more experienced. He was a general in the military. He's the guy who would be a better fit for S.H.I.E.L.D. And they're like, Nick Fury, he's too much of a loose cannon. We don't want him at this time. So I created Stoner off in his first appearance. Much to my surprise, many years later, someone brought him back in the comics. I didn't even know this. And then next thing you know, he's on TV and he's being played by Patrick Warburton, who, of course, Seinfeld fans know as Putty. Yeah. And I'm like, that's so cool.
Oh, wow. That is pretty cool.
So I guess my point is you don't get to pick your legacy in comics. Like you always think you'll create something and be like, this will be the thing that will define my career and people will know me for. And then like 30 years later, you realize you have zero control over that.
Going back to when you worked at Marvel, what was it like behind the scenes? Are there any stories that you could tell us and the environment and because I'm sure a lot has changed from how it was back then to how it is now. Are there anything that you could tell us how it was working when you were there?
When I was there, I would say it was a good mix of people. Like half the people would keep their doors shut, like the editors, and were super serious and would just focus on the work, like intensely focused. And then the other half, maybe a little less than half, but people liked to play pranks on each other and joke and clown. I happened to work in an office that had a couch in it, and that was pretty much an open door for anybody, freelancers, bullpen people, whoever, to just walk in and sit on the couch and just kind of chill for a while. It was great, meeting all the writers and artists, and the freelancers would come in. Got to work alongside John Romita, which was like the greatest thrill of a lifetime. He was Marvel's art director at the time. And the way it would work back then was he was also in charge of all of Marvel's covers, which means you would hire an artist. Let's make up, Joe Smith is going to be the artist. He sends in a sketch, or let's say 3 sketches for the cover, and we'd be like, okay, these sketches look pretty good. Let's bring them to John. We go to John Romita, and John would say, let's go with this one. And then John would do this thing when he would take a piece of tracing paper and put it over the sketch, and he would go, it could go like this. And in like 2 seconds, he would take a mediocre drawing or an uninspired drawing and turn it into a masterpiece. And he would just show how it could go. And then you would send it back to the artist and go, yes, here's what you should do with it. And that was so much fun.
Going back to the art, when you were there, I'm sure you saw a lot of sketches and doodles that maybe certain artists, they would just like draw and then maybe toss. Did it ever get in the back of your head like, hey, if you don't want that, I'll take it from you, part of my collection? Was there ever like in the back of your mind like these could be treasures that like comic collectors now would die to get, you know?
I didn't see anybody tossing any artwork. I'll be honest with you. That really wasn't something
Really?
to see.
Oh, wow.
No, I mean,
I've heard stories about where this is even back then, like way back then in the early years of comics, a lot of those original arts, they didn't see the value in it, so they just toss them. That could all just be rumors and things like that I've read.
I think you're going back. That's more like 60s, maybe 70s. I worked at Marvel in the 90s.
Okay, gotcha.
By the time the 1990s came, Marvel had an art returns department. There was a guy whose full-time job was just to return artwork to the artist. For each 22-page story, I think it was the penciler would get half the pages, the inker would get half the pages. I think that's how they divided it up. It wasn't my job, so I didn't, worry about that so much. But no, by the 90s, everybody knew this stuff was valuable. Everybody knew don't throw stuff away. Artists, they like to sketch things, but they like to keep their sketches. I never saw anybody throw anything away.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But I guess my favorite story is the time I got to have lunch with Stan Lee when I was on staff. Stan was based in LA, but he would fly out to New York like 3 or 4 times a year, like maybe quarterly. He would fly out just to check in, see what was going on. And whenever Stan was in town, usually Jim Salicrup would be one of the people to want to go out to lunch with him because Jim and Stan got along very well. Stan was writing an all-new Stan soapbox for Marvel Age at the time. So I did get to go to lunch with Stan. One of my first, I want to say maybe shortly after I started working there. Stan and I, we don't have the same birthday, but his birthday was December 28th and mine's December 29th, so we were only a day apart. And we had some cake after lunch. We brought up, they had a nice cake for everybody to celebrate Stan's birthday. And I remember that the waitress came over and said, who wants a drink with their cake? And, normally I guess you'd have a cup of tea or coffee or maybe even a glass of milk with your cake. But I was so excited. I was sitting next to Stan Lee. It was like, oh my God. I'm like, geeking out next to Stan, asking him all these questions, annoying questions that I'm sure he didn't want to answer. He's probably like, I'm just trying to have a lunch. I'm stuck sitting next to this kid who's asking all these questions. Now, first of all, let me say, I love Stan Lee. Huge fan. Stan's the greatest. He's a curmudgeon now. He's sort of a cranky, he's no longer with us, of course, but he was a very cranky old guy, lovable but cranky. So when the waitress said, what would you like to drink with your dessert, sir? I just kind of shrugged my shoulders. I had a Coke with my lunch. I said, I'll just have a Coke, please. And Stan shot me a look. And he just looks at me. He goes, what kind of a jerk has Coke with cake? And he was very serious about it. And to this day, everybody who's at the table thinks it's hilarious. Like, he was so mad. He was so angry at me for having cake with Coke. It was just, I still think he's the only guy, he can insult you right to your face and call you a jerk, and you still love the guy.
That is great.
I got called a jerk by Stan Lee. I mean, come on. It's the greatest lunch ever.
It really was. And then another time, Stan did call me a schmuck on a different occasion.
Do you want to elaborate on that one?
Sure, why not? Okay, so one of my great
not that we'll call you a schmuck.
What? No, you're not Stan Lee. Only Stan gets to call you.
Yes, of course. Yes.
One of my great pleasures at Marvel, I got to write the weekly Bullpen Bulletins page, which was awesome. Again, Jim Salicrup was writing it. He got super busy with other stuff. He didn't have as much time to do it anymore. He said to me, you want to do it? Sure. So for like 5 years or so, I was writing the Bullpen page for Marvel. Such a thrill, such an honor. You just look at who's gone before writing that page. It was Stan, and then probably Roy Thomas wrote it, and then a couple other people, and then me, and oh my God, I'm writing them. And at the time, Marvel was publishing like 10 million comics a month. And when we launched a weekly cartoon called The Bullpen Bullseye on that page, it was myself and Rick Parker doing it. Rick was drawing it, I was writing it. It was my name and his name on there. I was thinking about it later. I was like, my name was going out in 50 million Marvel comics every week. I mean, you couldn't ask for better exposure, really.
Seriously.
So the 30th anniversary of Spider-Man came up in the early 90s, and my assignment was, let's call up everybody who's ever worked on Spider-Man and ask them a question. And I wish we had come up with a different question. I wish we had done like, who's your favorite Spider-Man villain? Who's your favorite Spider-Man character? Or what makes Spider-Man, something. But what we came up with was, the question was, what was going on in your life when Spider-Man was created? What were you doing while Spider-Man was being created? And it's kind of a whatever question. I didn't like the question now, because now I'm like, it doesn't really have much to do with Spider-Man. It has more to do with what the person was doing in their life at the time. So
Yeah.
Or you were born yet.
Exactly. I got that answer from, I don't forget who. But yeah, I got to call Todd McFarlane, I got to call Eric Larson, and I got to speak to John Romita. I got to ask all these guys what was going on in their lives. And it was always the same question every time. What were you doing while Spider-Man was being created? So, of course, I had to call Stan, because, Stan's obviously the number one. At that time, he had written more issues of Spider-Man than anyone. So I called him up. I said, Stan, can I ask you a question about Spider-Man? Well, of course you can, true believer. What question would you like to ask me? Said,
Did he hold on? Wait, did he really talk like that to everyone?
Pretty much, yes. Yeah. I mean, the Stan that you saw in, I don't know, movies and TV, that pretty much was Stan.
That's crazy.
I love
And,
it.
and he used True Believer in his conversations.
Well,
just
let me put it this way. That's how I remember it. I'm not saying it happened, but let's just go with that's how I remember it.
I like it. I like it. Roll with it.
Okay, so then Stan said, what's your question? And I said, well, Stan, what was going on in your life while Spider-Man was being created? And Stan was taken aback. He goes, I was creating him, you schmuck. So I misworded the question. I should have said, while you were creating Spider-Man.
Wow, you were creating, yeah.
So he never did answer the question, actually. He said, if I'm going to answer that question, I'd rather do it in a Stan soapbox on my own. So, okay, that made sense. Of course, it's his place. But I will say that me and a couple other people in the office used to spend hours doing impressions of Stan Lee when he wasn't around. So that's kind of why I remember him maybe saying things he didn't necessarily say.
You actually got to have a pretty good impression of him, actually.
Well, thanks, true believer.
I mean, not just Stan. I think you have a pretty good impression of Todd too, as well.
Oh, thanks. Well, I like to think I'm a pretty good mimic. One of my future projects, I will do a YouTube video where I'm going to recreate the Stan Lee calls me a jerk incident, the cake and Coke incident, as I call it. And, I'm going to play Stan Lee in the video, of course, and there'll be a young person playing me. So, look forward to that.
Now that I'm thinking about it, were you there when all those Image creators left Marvel to form Image?
Yes, I was there when the Image guys left.
Could
Wow.
you tell us how that was at Marvel?
What was that like? Oh,
Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
now that
What was the environment at?
Yeah, because that was a
like
huge
when
exodus by
that
your
happened?
top creators.
Yeah. I mean, when the top artists, for the most part, drawing the top books, suddenly announced that they're all leaving at the same time on the same day, of course, everybody has. I wasn't working with any of those guys at the time, so it didn't affect me or my office at all. But we certainly saw it around us. We saw the other editors panicking. There was certainly a panic that set in.
Right.
I mean, everybody has to scramble to find new creators, new artists to take their places. And it's kind of funny. The thing that everybody forgets, I'm kind of fascinated by the Image exodus. So I was doing some research on it recently, and like Jim Lee was the last holdout. He was the one guy that really didn't want to leave Marvel. And, they had, I guess, the 6 guys, and Jim would have been the 7th. And they were like, come on, Jim, come with us. Jim at the time was drawing X-Men for Marvel, and apparently he was making something like $50,000 a month in royalty checks on the X-Men. So think about that. There were no guarantees when he went to Image that he was going to make any money. There was no guarantees that his books were going to sell, that Wildcats was going to sell. So Jim was, I guess Todd too. Todd was probably making about $50,000 a month on royalties on Spider-Man comics. So those 2 guys probably took the biggest risk. Although, Eric Larson was drawing amazing at the time. So they walked away from some big guaranteed money. Yes, they did make money at Image, of course. They all, let's just say some of them did break new sales records and did really well for themselves. Of course, Rob Liefeld going on, leaving. I guess he was on X-Force at the time. So yeah, they all walked away for some big money, but for most of them, it seemed to have paid off pretty well.
Wow.
So yeah, at the end of the day, the comics still have to come out every month, and if you're artist quits, you have to find a different artist. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, it sucks because the editors were also getting royalties too. I never really worked on any books that got royalties, so it didn't really affect me so much. Yeah, I mean, to a guy like who was editing the X-Men, suddenly he's not going to get that 30, 40, 50,000 bonus check every month that he was getting.
Jeez, that's so much money back then. I mean,
Oh,
So much
even
money
now.
now.
Yeah, but I mean,
There were people who became millionaires in the 90s writing and drawing for Marvel Comics, and that's just insane, but that's how it was back then.
quick question: what's the difference between What If and What the comics?
Okay, sure. What If is an alternate universe comic that pretty much shows you what happens in alternate universes. It's What If did, I think, 2 humor issues. I was very fortunate I got to write for one of the humor issues of What If, which was fun. And you know, here's the saddest thing that I got to write a lot of stuff for Marvel that never got published. I did write an issue of What If that I was paid for. It was never published. It was What If Shalabal had become the Silver Surfer, which is, it wasn't my idea. It was one of those stories that had been floating around forever, but nobody seemed to be doing anything with it. So I said, I'll do that one. And then I wrote it and got paid for it. And then the editor said, okay, we want Ron Lim to draw this one, which at the time Ron Lim was drawing, Silver Surfer and Infinity War and all those things. So he was, a hot property, but he was so busy that every time it seemed like he was going to draw my story, he just never got around to it. So to this day, it was never published, and that's unfortunate. But that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
I've had hundreds of pages that I wrote for Marvel that were never published, which is unfortunate. There was a complete Punisher graphic novel that I had plotted and Stan was going to script that just never happened. It was drawn. It was completely penciled and script plotted. And then there was a book that I worked on that did come out in the 90s called Nightcat, which I plotted with Jim Salicrup and then Stan Lee scripted, which I love because to this day, if you open up that Nightcat comic to page 1, it looks like it says Barry Dutter plot, Stan Lee script. There actually is another guy whose name is next to mine for plot, but it looks like I plotted it and Stan scripted it. But I did work on it. And then, so Jim had this idea of, well, let's do, we like this Nightcat character, let's put her in a Spider-Man comic. So the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man comic, Jim had this idea. He paid me to write an issue of Spider-Man featuring Nightcat and Mysterio was the villain, and Spider-Man, of course. And it was going to be drawn by someone like Michael Golden, like a top artist at the time, or an Art Adams or someone like that. And bottom line, Jim read my story. He hated it. He paid me for it, and it was thrown in a drawer somewhere and never saw the light of day. So that was. I mean, I got paid to write a Spider-Man story, which is like a dream come true, and it never got printed. But I still have the receipt.
I'm interested about that Punisher story. You had a full story, scripted and everything, and it never went out.
Yeah, and that was just I have half a dozen stories like that, but I would imagine most creators probably have a story, half a dozen or dozens of stories like that.
Okay, gotcha.
For whatever reason, I don't know why, but sometimes things just don't happen.
What about Ren and Stimpy? It looks like, did you get any info from John Kay and Bob Camp as when you were writing that series?
No, I never got to speak to either of them while I was writing the series. I was brought aboard. There was Dan Slott was the writer for the first 19 issues of Ren and Stimpy, and then I think starting with issue 20, I think I was brought into script. I think it was one of Dan's stories, or it might have been a Mike Cazella story. And then with issue 20, I was the sole writer on that one for a while, which was, when an editor of Marvel Comics, and Mike Lackey was the editor, he was a good friend of mine on staff at the time. He came to me one day and said, how'd you like to write this book? And I was just like, wow, an editor from Marvel Comics just asked me to write a monthly Marvel comic. That's, ever since I was 9 years old, that was the only thing I ever wanted, to write or draw for Marvel. Like most writers, I started off wanting to be an artist, and I realized that's too hard, and I realized it's a lot easier to be a writer, so I switched over to writing at a pretty early age. But all of our stories had to be approved by Nickelodeon, and to the best of my knowledge, I don't think any of my stuff was ever rejected by Nickelodeon. I think they had a pretty much like an open door policy. It was just, as long as you don't do anything, crazy, they'll pretty much, they approve the story.
Would you ever want to go back to working for Marvel?
I would love to go back to working for Marvel. I'm always waiting for the phone to ring. It's a little tricky. When I worked for Marvel, it was a very incestuous time for the company. And by that, I mean, editors would give work to other editors. And it was crazy, but that's how the company was run back then. Yes, there were some freelance writers, but a lot of it was. All right, Tom DeFalco was in charge of the company. He was our editor-in-chief, a great guy. Loved Tom. He always had 2 monthly books guaranteed. So think about that. He was making his salary from Marvel, his staff job. He was making, I would assume a very healthy salary plus 2 monthly books. And back then, most comics were paying royalties, so there were probably money on top of that. Mark Grunwald, another great guy, he always had his 2 monthly books. And that's pretty much how people got work back then. It was just, hey, I've got this book, and the Iron Man needs a writer. Do you want to write it? Oh, okay, I've got whatever, this book, Captain Marvel, whatever, needs a writer. Do you want to write? Sure, I'll write your book, you write my book. And that's how Marvel worked back then. It was, I don't know. I'm not real proud of that aspect of it, but that is how I got work. So I can't really, can't fault it too much.
What go ahead, Red. Now, if you do get called back, would you follow up on some of the characters that you have written, like Negative Four Bushman and Spider-Ham 2099? Where would they be at now if you had written new stories for them?
Yeah, I would love to do more with Spider-Ham, whether it be 2099 or because I also wrote the regular Spider-Ham. I did create the character of Pork Grind, who was a Venom knockoff, and years later people said to me, "Oh, why didn't he's a pig, right?" I said, "Yeah, well, of course, if Peter Porker's a pig, I wanted the guy he fights to be a pig too. It just made sense to me. But he's a bigger, stronger pig because Venom in the comics has always been drawn, more muscular and stronger than Spider-Man." And years later, people said to me, "Oh, why didn't you just call him Ven Ham?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I actually like that idea better." If I ever were to go back to Marvel, yes, Ven Ham would be the new name for that character. I would change his name. But yeah, it'd be a blast to go back to revisit these old characters. That'd be so much fun. I would love that. You don't see a lot of humor from Marvel these days. And I will say this, they do Spider-Ham, but they usually have him interacting with the Spider-Verse, with the other characters.
Yeah.
And I actually don't approve of that. And I'll tell you why. Because in our universe, we eat pigs. That's all we do. We just kill and eat pigs all the time, which is great. I love, they're delicious. Love bacon. I love, ham, everything you can get from a pig is delicious. I love it. But I think it's weird that they're hanging out with this pig guy, Spider-Ham, and he never says anything, and nobody ever said, like in the movie, they made a joke of, "Oh, well, he's such a pig," but I don't know. I was a little uncomfortable with stories where you have an anthropomorphic animal in our world, in a world where we kill and eat probably millions of pigs every year, every day.
Oh, every day, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it would be so much fun. I would love to I guess what I was trying to say before is, so I don't really know anybody who works at Marvel on staff anymore. When I was on staff, we had, let's say 20 editors and 20 assistant editors, something like that. So 40 people in the editorial department. Over the time, pretty much every single one of them was let go, except for one, who is Tom Brevoort. He's the only person I know who still works for Marvel to this day. Tom's a great guy. We always got along, but he's working with big stars, big names.
Right.
And you don't always think, I should call that person from 30 years ago who I used to work with.
Yeah.
So,
What about any thoughts of doing like a create your own type of comic?
Actually did publish my own comic briefly back in the mid 2000s.
Okay.
What happened was, after Marvel, I started writing for Mad Magazine. I wrote a couple of things for them, which was awesome. That's again, a dream come true. Then I started writing for Cracked Magazine, which was, of course, the cheap ripoff of Mad, but still they had a lot more work for me. So I was like, all right, I'll go where the money is. And then after that, Cracked came to an end. So I said, well, I have all this experience. What the Mad, Cracked, and all this humor magazine. Why don't I just publish my own magazine? So I did. I did 2 issues of my own humor magazine called Gag, G-A-G magazine. And that was a blast. What I did was I called up all the guys I used to work with at Marvel, not all of them, but a bunch of people I had worked with at What The, and people I worked with on Ren and Stimpy. Like, I called all my old Beavis and Butthead, because I worked on the Beavis and Butthead comic for Marvel a little bit too. Just called all these other people and like, hey, want to draw for me? Yeah. So put out a very professional, very slick, very nice magazine. But the timing to launch a new humor magazine in the mid 2000s was a terrible timing. It's still terrible even today, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There's not a huge market for humor. Like, Mad Magazine got canceled. Mad couldn't sustain a magazine. And keep in mind, Mad has Warner Brothers money behind it.
Right.
They couldn't keep it going.
Very true. Very true.
they're pretty much all reprint now.
Yeah.
So, I always say if my magazine had come out in the 90s, mid-late 90s, I probably could have had a nice run. I probably could have, ridden that wave just before the market crashed. But, it was a learning experience. I probably wouldn't want to publish my own thing again. I do have a book that I did a Kickstarter for, and apologies to all my backers. I am going to publish the book. Probably, if not the end of this year, then next year. It's definitely going to happen. But it's about all my experiences of being on TV game shows and reality shows. So that's another thing that's going to come. I did Kickstart it. It is happening. And that's I did it as a blog. I mean, anybody who wants to read it can just read my blog. It's all out there. I think it's called, what did I call it? Confessions of a Hollywood Nobody.
So that was an intentional thing that you wanted to just dive into all those game shows. And
what happened was in 1998, I wasn't getting a ton of comic book work anymore. Unfortunately, once all your friends, Marvel went through a period of bankruptcy where they had to lay off most of the staff. So pretty much all my friends got fired and all my books got canceled in like one day, which was, insane.
Oof.
But, that's the publishing business. So I wrote a book that I'd been thinking about for years. I did a book on how to meet girls. It was called The Shy Guy's Guide to Dating. It's an actual book. It was published by St. Martin's Press in New York. It was like one of my greatest honors to have a real book published by a real publisher. And, that book did really well for me. And it was, I wrote it out of a genuine desire to help people, to help guys basically get over their shyness and try and meet girls. And because I wrote that book, I got contacted by a game show called What's My Line? I'm sorry, let me start over. It's called To Tell the Truth. I'm telling a lie. And they said, how'd you like to come on this show to tell the truth? And they said, we'll hire 2 other guys to pretend to be you, and then the celebrity panel has to guess who's the real you. And I was like, and they're like, yeah, we'll fly you to LA. I was living on the East Coast at the time. We'll fly you, one coast to another. We'll put you up in a hotel. We'll take you around by limo all over town, and you'll be on this show. I was like, yes, absolutely, I'll be on this show. So I went on this show, and it was pretty surreal. Imagine a network TV show hires 2 other people, actors, to pretend to be you, and they're getting on camera and saying, I'm Barry Dutter. No, I'm Barry Dutter. And I wrote this. No, I wrote this. I'm like, wow, this is so much fun. It's a blast. But because of that experience, I was like, wow, being on a reality/game show is kind of fun. Maybe I could do more. So next thing I know, I tried out for The Weakest Link and booked it. I was a contestant on The Weakest Link in an early season back in 2001. A couple months later, find out that Wheel of Fortunes. I was living in Florida at the time. They're coming down to Miami. I try out. I book that show. Suddenly, I'm booking every single show that I try out for as a game show contestant.
do they
tried this out?
Do they have like history of like when you try out? Do you let them know you've been on other shows so it helps you get on the current show that you're trying to get on?
Well, here's the funny thing about game shows. They don't want the same people over and over again. They sometimes have to conveniently leave information off your application.
I see.
Like in every application, it'll say, "Have you been on any other game shows before?" And sometimes I'll mention 1 or 2 shows that I've been on. I'll mention stuff that I did, Weakest Link, Deal or No Deal, stuff that I did 10, 15 years ago, and I'll leave off any current stuff because most game shows have a rule that if you've done any other game shows within the past couple of years, they don't really want you on. So you have to develop selective amnesia sometimes when you do these things.
Gotcha.
Were you on any of the shows? No. I don't know what you're talking about. No, not that one.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, but it's funny because sometimes the same casting people work for different shows. Like there'll be a person whose job it is to cast Wheel of Fortune, and then maybe after that job, then they go on to cast Weakest Link, and suddenly they go, "Well, we've seen you before. We know you. You're not fooling us." So occasionally you do recognize, or they recognize you. You do get recognized.
You wrote a. Oh,
go
ahead.
I'm on a short list now of people who, when they have a new show, I'm on the list of people that they contact and say, "Hey, would you like to try out for this new show?" Which is kind of fun.
That does sound like fun.
Yeah. I'm not allowed to give any details. I'm currently auditioning for a game show, but I'm not allowed to say what it is yet. But fingers crossed.
Do you get I know that when you're on a game show, you play the game for money. Do you get any do you get money for at least filming? Or
As a
you
rule,
only-
no. I
Okay.
think most game shows do not pay you anything to be there. I think there might have been one or two shows where the prize was a super cheap prize, and they're like, look, we'll just give you $100, just come in for the day, even if you
Right.
don't win the prize, at least you get the $100. I've done
Gotcha.
a couple things like that where you're like, all right, I have a chance to win something. If not, it's not a total waste of time. At least I get my $100. But, I mean, when I was on the Weakest Link the first time, well, I was only on it one time, but it was the first run of shows. They flew me across the country, me and I think 9 other contestants, because at the time it was, I think, 10 contestants competing against each other. And, you know, they put you up in a hotel, and they pay airfare, and they provide your meals. I think you get a per diem while you're there. But if you lose, as the host used to say, you get nothing. So that particular show, I did not win, but I made it all the way to the final round, which is what I really wanted. I had a shot.
So I saw an episode, or I saw a clip of you at the Wheel of Fortune, and I think you ended with like $5,000. Now, do contestants who come in second or third with that kind of cash, do they get to keep it, or do you just get your $100? Like, how does that work?
You keep all your money on Wheel of Fortune.
Oh,
Yeah.
Nice.
I think Jeopardy's the same way. I think those are the only two shows where every contestant goes home with money if you have any winnings.
Oh, right
Which is
on.
awesome. Yeah, no, on Wheel of Fortune, I was up to like 15,000 at one point, and I hit bankrupt 3 times on the show.
Yeah.
Oh,
They
my
tell you to
God.
spin that wheel hard. They say spin as hard as you can. Every time I spun it would go right to bankrupt.
Okay, another question. How heavy is that wheel? Is that wheel
It's
really as heavy? It is?
Super heavy. And they tell you want to lean in and give it a big spin. And I was playing against a couple of very petite women who were giving it these little dainty little half spins. I was the only one following the instructions, and I hit bankrupt 3 times, which was super annoying. But I did get to leave with $5,000 for that show.
That's awesome.
That's
okay.
cool.
That's pretty cool.
Frustrating, to not win more, but it's all right. I'll get my big win someday.
All right, sir. I wanted to ask you. You said you wrote a book, a dating book. Did you ever meet Mystery? You know what I'm talking about?
I've seen him on TV, but no, I've never met him.
Okay, because I know that they also had a similar book, The Game, that was kind of popular in the early 2000s. So
Yeah, my book, I would assume, is very different from most other books, because my book is written specifically for the shy guy, for the guy who really just has a super hard time approaching women, just can't get up the nerve to walk up to a girl and talk to her. So my book, I actually take inspiration from all the TV shows and movies that I watched as a kid, everything from Fast Times at Ridgemont High to Hard Bodies to teen sex comedies from the 80s. To even Happy Days, or just any show that features about dating, Three's Company. Like I go into detail in the book about how you can take inspiration from Jack Tripper, take inspiration from Potsy, from Happy Days. Just like it's very much a pop culture type book. It's written for the pop culture.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, sir, I know you've got to go pretty soon. Before we let you leave, we've got some lightning questions that E-Man wants to ask you.
Okay.
And then if there's anything that you want to plug, please do so right after the questions, sir.
All right.
We got
All
some rapid fire questions for you, Barry. So the very first answer that comes to head, you just got to answer it, whether it's right, wrong, or has nothing to do with the question at all, okay?
All right.
All right, my friend, you ready?
Let's do this.
Let's go. Drive-through or Chinese takeout?
Chinese takeout.
Left sock or right sock?
Right sock.
Favorite binge-worthy show?
Stranger Things.
Michael or Prince?
Prince.
Transformers or GoBots?
Transformers.
Scarface and Godfather?
Scarface all the way.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
K-pop or hip-hop?
Hip hop.
Deal or no deal?
Ooh. Deal this time.
The last question for you, my friend. Are girls scary?
Yes, they can be scary, but you know what? If you get over your fears and you pursue them, it's worth it.
There it
Worth
is.
overcoming your fears. One last thing I just want to mention, that working for Marvel was like the greatest experience of my life, and even though I'm not with them anymore, I still loved it. And I would just, encourage anyone to just pursue your dreams. And I was one of the lucky ones. My dream came true, and it can happen to anybody. I guess what I'm trying to say. So just go for it. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Reach for the stars is what you're saying. Just do it.
There
Go
you
for
go.
it. Love it.
Thanks, guys.
And where can we find you, sir? And do you have any other projects that we need to look out for?
Well, my book, Confessions of a Hollywood Nothing, is probably going to come out one of these days. You can go find the blog. It's actually the whole book is there on my blog for free if you want to read it. Confessions of a Hollywood Nothing. It's up there online. And other than that, I just buy and sell comic book collections on eBay and Facebook. So look for me on Facebook, and you can find me there.
Yeah, for anyone who is on any particular comic book buy sell Facebook groups, you are very active on them. Are there any particular ones any particular Facebook groups that you focus on, that way that people can find you on there?
Yes, I'm in a group called the Comic Book Lovers Buy, Sell, and Trade Group. If you just type in Comic Book Lovers on Facebook, it probably should be one of the first things that comes up. That's actually the only group that I sell in. When I first started out, people told me, oh, you could sell in this group or that group or this group. And so I started selling in one of the more popular groups. And then one of the customers seemed like kind of a deadbeat. And I was told, oh, yeah, that guy's been kicked out of every other group. And I was like, well, why is he in this group? And they were like, oh, we just thought we'd give him another chance. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go sell in the other group then that kicked him out. I didn't want this deadbeat buying my stuff. So anyway, I'm in the Comic Book Lovers group. I sell there 6 days a week, sometimes more, sometimes 360-ish days a year I'm in there selling. So it's a lot of fun. It's a blast, and people seem to love comic book auctions. So come on in and check it out.
All auctions end at 5 p.m. Pacific.
That's right.
How big is the comic book collection, though?
I like to say I don't own any comic books at this point. I mean, I bought 3 collections last month in inventory, but I don't own them. That's just product. That's just in one door and out the other door. So I probably have, let's say, 30, 40 long boxes at any given time. But personally, I don't. Wow. I collected comics for 30 years, sold my collection on eBay one at a time, and had so much fun doing it. Now I just buy and sell other people's collections.
Gotcha.
I myself do not own a single comic book.
Well, all that encyclopedia knowledge is already stored in your head, so.
Yeah, we always have Wikipedia too.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir, for.
Thank you, Barry.
being on the
Appreciate you
show.
showing up.
It was a blast. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
Have a good one now, Barry.
Have a good night, sir.
Talk to you later. Bye.
All right, bye.
Excelsior. Bye-bye.
Oh man, he had a lot of knowledge. He's had a lot of experience in the past, hasn't he?
Definitely. I would have liked to get more stories on all the artists that he worked with and all the other writers.
Man, well, I mean, still though, like he lived a dream. He reached for the stars. He ended up working at Marvel. He worked for a publishing company that he absolutely loved. That's big time right there. No matter how
I got to write a few monthly books.
exactly,
and
he created a book. What, Spider-Ham 2099? Hey,
Yep.
look, there's Spider-Gwen. Who's to say that Ham 2099 won't come back and make a big difference?
There's Spider-Gwen, which is a penguin version of Spider-Gwen.
See, I mean, look, he created something out there. That I didn't create
and pork
anything.
rind, or actually now Venom.
I didn't create anything. AJ hasn't created it. He created something, and it's on Marvel, man. That guy's a lot bigger than I am. Good.
I
good
create
for
something
him.
every day, but it's always flushed down.
Shut up! Oh my God, no, stop! No, why?
All right, guys. Thank you again for listening, and have a good night.
Later.
Peace.
Peace.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the C-List Villains Podcast, your cultivators of the comic culture. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and Spotify. All you got to do is search for C-List Villains. If you want to send us an email, you can contact us at clistvillains rarkeys@gmail.com. Make sure you follow Luke Weeks on Facebook and Instagram and join its Facebook group, Rare Keys and First Appearance Comics, also known as RKFA Comics. I'm your host AJ, and you can find me on Instagram, AJ the Comic Collector. Thank you, and see you next episode.